Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's semi-annual progress reporting webinar on calculating FTEs. My name is Hannah, and I'm here with my colleague, Eliza. We are also joined by our colleagues, Devin and Erica, who will be helping us with the question and answer pod. We are all members of the VAWA Measuring Effectiveness Initiative, the TA provider that helps you learn about and report and complete your OVW progress report. Thank you to TA2TA for hosting today's webinar, and to the captioners and interpreters that are here helping us present to you all. Before I give you a little more detail about our role and the goals for today's training, I wanted to orient you a little bit more to this webinar's platform and how we hope to use it. You will see there is a chat pod and a Q&A pod like Elle talked about. The chat pod is being used to share resources with you, such as links to captioning and website links. Meanwhile, we ask that you use the Q&A feature to ask all your questions. We will hold off on many of the questions until the end of the presentation and aim to answer those items verbally for all to hear at that time. However, if you have a question that's a little less general, we will likely respond to it within the Q&A pod during the presentation. You are here with us today because your semi-annual progress report is almost due. The progress reports are due 30 days after the close of the reporting period. So that means your January to June 2021 progress report is due on July 30th. A little bit of background about who we are at VAWA MEI. So at VAWA MEI, like I said, we are the technical assistance providers charged with helping you report your grant-funded activities. Our team works out of the Muskie School of Public Service in Maine, here at the University of Southern Maine in Portland. And so here at VAWA MEI, we do two things mostly. We collect, align, and analyze data from thousands of VAWA grantees nationwide. We support grantees in completing their progress report via these webinars, as well as direct technical assistance over the phone or via email. We are an OVW grantee ourselves. So as mentioned before, we are a TA provider. We are funded to be knowledgeable, super knowledgeable on the progress reports, so you don't have to be. We are not just grants. We are not OVW. Therefore, we do not monitor your grant or your grant-funded activities, but instead we try to make sense of your data and make sure you are reporting as accurately as possible. So for today's training plan, we will teach you all how to calculate the full-time equivalent, or FTE, data that you will need to submit in the staff section of your semi-annual progress report. We will practice a few FTE calculations using polls. We will then review how to access and use the FTE calculator we have available on our website. And then we'll review available resources and where to ask for help. Before we dive into FTEs, we wanted to highlight a few COVID-19 reporting guidance. We understand that grantees may be hindered in reporting complete or accurate information due to the pandemic, especially if they or their project partners do not have access to files. If you're unable to collect data for the report, we recommend that you do not report estimates. Any numbers reported should have adequate source documentation, meaning records to support reported information. Every progress report includes a narrative field where grantees can provide additional information about the data they report. Please use that space to explain any incomplete or missing data. We encourage you to also use other narrative fields throughout the form to discuss the impact COVID-19 has had on grant-supported activities, and to use words like COVID-19 and pandemic in your descriptions. Even if data becomes available at a later date post the reporting period you are reporting on, per normal reporting guidance, do not use a future reporting period progress report to report activities that took place during the current reporting period. So if data becomes available after you have submitted your progress report, you have two options, and both involve contacting your OVW program specialist. We've also received some questions about how to validate a progress report if you want to leave a data field blank. And in some cases, a field can be left blank and the reporting form will still validate successfully. However, there are also cases where the form will not validate successfully if there is missing data. And so if this happens, we recommend that you enter dummy data or fake data into the report, such as entering a 1 into the field that cannot remain blank. Then go to the last narrative question on the form, where you are asked to discuss the data you submit and explain that you entered 1 in question X in order to validate the form, and that number should actually be deleted. That way, by doing that, you'll be able to validate the form and submit the data by the deadline. And we can also update it. On the slide is a few COVID-19 resources that might be helpful to you. The first is some guidance for grantees from OVW. The second is a resource list from Futures Without Violence. The last is a COVID-19 resource hub from TA to TA. And then on the next slide, we have some VAWA MEI COVID-19 resources. So the first one is a set of FAQs, or frequently asked questions, and a link to our Contact Us form. The second bullet is reporting in a pandemic office hours recording, and that is a recording of a webinar we hosted last year with OVW, where we answered questions about how to report during the pandemic. And then lastly is the Crafting Narratives webinar video and narrative examples. So there is a link to a recording of a webinar about writing narratives, as well as a link to a document that has some example narrative if you would like to review that.
All right, so I will take over from here and talk about the actual reporting of the staff information. And the very first thing that you should keep in mind when you report on staff is that you should only report staff whose salary is either fully or partially funded with your OVW grant funds. And this does include contracted work if it is funded with OVW grants. Next, you should also keep in mind to only to report staff by the activity they perform and not by the job title they hold. And in cases where a staff member falls into two of the categories on the form, you should divide their FTEs between those applicable categories. You should also make sure to report all of your FTEs to the second decimal. So that means you should report, for example, 1.00 FTEs. Furthermore, staff time should be prorated wherever that is necessary. Whoop, that did not move. Can you see the PowerPoint moving?
No, it looks like we're still on the staff information slide 8.
Here we go. All right, I'm sorry about that. So as the slide now shows, you should prorate staff time wherever that is necessary. And it's necessary in cases such as when a staff member is part-time, when someone is hired partway through the grant period, when there's a contractor that's paid with OVW grant funds, or when a staff member is working full-time, but is only partially funded with your OVW program funds. And finally, there is an other category on your reporting form, but we ask you to please use that other category very sparingly. Most of the activities that are typically performed by staff are already included on the form, all the categories that the form provides. So if you feel you still need to use the other category, please make sure to be as specific as possible. So if you have multiple entries in the other category, please make sure to correlate each entry with a specific FTE amount. And again, please keep in mind to report staff by the activity they perform and not by their job title. So do not report generic job titles in the other category, such as consultant or graduate assistant, because those don't really describe the actual function performed by the staff member. Right, let's try this again. All right, that worked. So when you see this slide and all these numbers on it, you know that it can look a little intimidating maybe, but really all these calculations are based on some simple assumptions. So it's based on the assumption of a 40-hour work week and a 6-month reporting period for all of the discretionary grant programs. And so 40 hours worked per week for 26 weeks of the reporting period would equal a total of 1,040 working hours in the 6-month reporting period. And to use one of these examples here on the slide, 1.00 FTE is equal to one staff member who is fully OVW grant funded and working full-time for 40 hours a week over the 26 weeks of the reporting period, which then equals 1,040 hours worked in total. So you can use these basic calculations to help you figure out how to prorate FTEs if that's necessary for your staff situation. Because if you know the total number of hours that a staff member worked in the 6-month reporting period, you can simply divide that total number of hours by 1,040 to get the appropriate FTE. So if we use this example here in the middle, and you have a staff person that's working part-time and they're working 16 hours a week for the entire 6-month reporting period, that is 416 hours over the 6 months. And if you divide 416 by the 1,040, you will get 0.40 FTE. We know that's kind of a lot, so Hannah is going to take you through some examples now.
Okay, so for the first example, let's say your university received an OVW program grant for a full-time counselor whose salary is 75% funded by the grant, and another full-time counselor whose salary is 15% funded by the grant. What FTE would you report? Would you report A, 0.9, B, 1.5, or C, 2? You should see a poll now where you can type in. Great. Excellent. So you would report, Eliza, will you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So in this situation, you would report only grant-funded staff, which means you would indicate answer A, because you would report the OVW-funded personnel, which would be the 0.75 plus the 0.15 to give you 0.9, which you would then report in the counselor category. Okay. Second example. So let's say your organization's OVW program grant was used to fund a part-time trainer who spends 6 hours per week providing trainings and 4 hours per week completing support staff tasks around the office. What FTEs would you report? Would you report 0.25 in support staff, 0.6 in trainer, and 0.4 in support, or 0.15 trainer and 0.1 support staff? Excellent. I appreciate seeing answers come in real time. Great. So it looks like the majority of you indicated C, which is the correct answer. So in this situation, you want to remember to report by job function and not by job title. And so you would split the grant-funded trainer time by function, which would give you 0.15 trainer FTEs, and that's calculated by taking 6 hours and dividing it by the 40-hour work week. And for support staff, you would take the 4 hours and divide it by 40. So the next example we have, your organization used its OVW grant to fund a full-time counseling position. The counselor was hired 2 months into the reporting period. What FTE would you report? Would you report A, 0.33, B, 0.67, or C, 1? Great. Great. So yeah, again, the majority indicated the correct answer, which would be 0.67. And so in this example, you want to make sure to prorate the FTEs for staff who work only part of the reporting period. And so you would need the FTE to reflect 4 months of the 6-month reporting period. So 4 divided by 6 gives you 0.67. Okay, example number 4. Your OVW program grant paid a translator for 65 hours of work. What FTE would you report? 0.65 translator, 0.15 translator, or 0.06 translator? Great. Yeah. So again, the majority of y'all entered in the correct answer, which is C. And so here you want to remember to convert the funds used for contractors or consultants into an FTE. So to get the 0.06, you would take 65, which is the amount of hours worked, divide that by the 1,040 hours available in the reporting period to give you 0.06. And so this slide shows some common reporting discrepancies that we often see when we review the data. One indication that something might be off that we see is really high numbers of FTEs in a single category. That typically shows us that perhaps things are not being reported in a decimal place, or that the FTEs are not being divided up by function performed, which again, we see staff not being prorated by job function. So OVW wants to know what are the functions that the grant funded staff are performing. And so you want to make sure to split up the FTEs into the corresponding categories on the reporting form. And lastly, we will often see FTEs not being prorated by the hire date and or the receipt of funds. So sometimes we'll see in the narrative that it says a full-time employee was only employed for 2 months, but the FTE is one whole FTE, and that indicates to us a misreporting. And we want to make sure to have the denominator be the full 6 months in the reporting form, even if you have not begun using grant funds at the beginning of the reporting period, because we want a common denominator for all of the reports so we can report out on the data more easily and accurately. So what we have here are some more examples and resources for how to calculate staff FTEs. So on our website, we have frequently asked questions devoted to the staff section. We also have an e-learning video of what's an FTE that walks you through how to calculate an FTE and how to report it. And we also have the FTE Calculator available on our website and an introduction video on how to use this tool. And Eliza will walk us through how to use the tool as well as how to access it on our website.
Right, thank you, Hannah. I just need to get the PowerPoint to move again. All right, here we go. So yeah, we hope this was helpful information so far, but we also know that calculating staff can be really complicated in some instances if you have like a more complex staff situation. And so our team has developed this tool that we call the FTE Calculator, and it's available on our website. And this slide shows a screenshot of the tool. It is an Excel workbook. And the great news is that you don't actually have to calculate anything yourself when you use it, because the tool will do everything for you. And as you can see, there's a series of steps that is numbered, and you will just follow all these steps and put in all the information that you have about your staff one by one. And then the tool will calculate and give you all the numbers for your staff down here in that yellow table to the right. And to give you a better idea of how that works and where to find the tool, we're just going to do that together right now. So I'm going to exit out here and take you to our website. So this is what our website looks like. And if you're not familiar with it, I would highly encourage that you may want to check it out. It's vawamei.org, but we also have that contact information later on. And this website has a lot of really helpful information for all the different grant programs. We try to put everything on there to make your life easier when you fill out these reports. And you can find the FTE calculator by going to your grant program. But the easiest way that we're going to use today is just to go to Tools and Resources. And then go to Resource Type here in the drop-down menu. Select FTE Calculator and hit Search. And then we see the 3 results down here. You can see there's a calculator for the SAS program, one for the STAF program. But today we're just going to use the general FTE calculator. And when you click on it, it's going to take you to this site. And as you can see, there's some information right here. And there's also that link to the video that Hannah just mentioned. So if you choose to use this tool after the webinar, you can download it here and then also open this video and just maybe follow along with the video while you fill out the FTE calculator. And that might just be really helpful navigating it. Now we're just going to download this. So depending on the setup of your computer, this might either just go directly to your download folder, but for me, it will just show up down here and I can just open it directly. Right, it's going to take a second. So this is what it looks like when you open it. And because this is an online document, I personally have to click Enable Editing before I can use it. And that might be the case for you as well. So if you get this little bar, just click Enable Editing, and then it'll get ready for you. All right. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that depending on how big your screen is, this might fit into your screen just like this, or maybe it's going to be too big or too small. And you can always use these little buttons down here. Just zoom in or zoom out a bit, depending on what your needs are. So I'm just going to use the 90%. Whoop. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that there are 2 different tabs down here. And the first tab is the FTE calculator itself. But the second one just includes some frequently asked questions about how to calculate staff FTEs in general. So if you're working in the calculator and you come across a question and you're just not sure how to deal with it, you can just click in here and see if maybe your question's already answered. And if not, then please just reach out to us and we're going to do our best to help you with this question. Okay, we're going to go back into the calculator now and go through an example together to show you how it works. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are these steps from step 1 to step 9 over here. And each step has a little explanation right underneath. And you're just gonna follow the explanation for each step one by one. It's very important not to skip a step because the calculator needs all the information to correctly calculate your FTEs in the end. So the example that we're going to be using is the one we just heard in the presentation. So in this example, the organization received an OVW program grant for a full-time counselor whose salary is 75% funded by the grant, and another full-time counselor whose salary is 15% funded by the grant. So I'm going to start with step 1. And step 1 asks you to select your grant program from the drop-down list below. So we're going to click into this box, and a little drop-down is going to pop up. And you can scroll through and just find your program. And you have to pick one. So I'm just going to say, in this example, it's a campus grantee. And so once we have selected this, in that little yellow table over here, it will automatically populate all the different staff categories that are available for the campus program. Okay, step 2. Enter the total available hours in your program's work week. This has a 40-hour work week as the default. But if your organization has, for example, a 35-hour work week or whatever number you work with, you would just click in here and change that number and then move on as you normally would. I'm just gonna leave the 40 hours for now. Moving on to step 3. Enter the name of the staff member whose time was supported by OVW grant funds in the table below. So we're just gonna name this person Staff A. Easy enough. Move on to step 4. Step 4 asks you to enter the number of months during the 6-month reporting period that this staff member's position was paid with OVW grant funds. So the normal reporting period that we deal with here is 6 months. So in this example, they worked for the full 6 months, so we're just gonna enter a 6. Step 5 asks you to use the drop-down list below to select the function the staff member performed while supported with your OVW grant funds during the reporting period. So again, make sure to report by function and not by the job title the person holds. And if this person performed in multiple roles, please use the additional cells below to select all functions that apply. So as you can see, for this one staff member, there's multiple rows available. So if they perform multiple functions, you would just put in all the functions that apply. And it says use the drop-down list. And as you can see, you will have to click into the cell, and then this little drop-down option will appear. So just make sure to click into the cell so that you can actually select them. And in our example, we have a counselor. So we're gonna scroll through here to find the counselor category and select it. And then we can move on to step 6. Step 6 is really important because here we're going to use the method that will be used to calculate the FTE. So use the drop-down list to select the method you will use to report the time supported by grant funds in this reporting period. So again, click into the cell, and you will see there's the drop-down menu option, and you will click on it, and you will see these 3 different methods. And you will select the method based on the information that you have. So if you know the hours a staff person worked per week, you will select the first option. If you know the total hours a staff person worked over the entire period, you will select the second option. And if you know the percent of time a staff person was funded through the OVW grants, you will select the third option. So in this case, we know that this counselor salary was funded 75% through the OVW grant funds. So we will go with option 3 here. And then in step 7, you would enter the number associated with each grant funded function based on the method you chose over here. So in this case, that is 75%. So we're going to put in 75. And if we move on to step 8, it tells us to repeat steps 3 to 7 for each staff person. So since we have a second staff person, we're gonna go back to step 3. Call it staff person B. This is again over the 6-month reporting period. So we're entering a 6. And it is again a counselor. So we click into the cell, we open the drop down, we scroll until we find the counselor position. And this time we know that it's 15%. So we're gonna, again, go with the percent of time option and put in 15. And this is all the staff members that we have. So that means we have completed entering all the information. And we can scroll over here to look at our little yellow table that should now show all of our final FTE calculations. And if we look here for the counselor category, we see that the final calculation is the 0.9 FTEs. And if we scroll down, it will also give us the total, which is the same in this case because it's all in one category. All right. So I'm going to run through 2 more examples just to show you how the FTE calculator works in different contexts. This here. All right, so I already entered the information, but we're just going to go through it step by step. This is the second example from the PowerPoint where the organization's OVW program grant was used to fund a part-time trainer who spent 6 hours a week providing trainings and 4 hours a week completing support staff tasks around the office. And for the sake of this example, we're going to assume this is a culturally specific services program grantee that has a 40-hour work week. And this is one staff person, staff A, and they worked through the entire 6-month reporting period. And now onto step 5, because we have to report by function and not by staff title. We look for the trainer educator category. And then we also look for the support staff category because this one staff person performed both functions. And then for the step 6, the method to calculate the FTEs, we go based off of the information we have, and we know that this person worked 6 hours a week as a trainer and 4 hours a week as support staff. So hours worked per week would be the appropriate method to select here. And then for step 7, it's very important that you make sure that the number is entered in the correct row to correspond to the correct category. So we enter 6 hours for trainer and 4 hours a week for support staff. And since that's the only staff person in this example, we're done, and we can look at our yellow table and we see that there's 0.1 support staff and 0.15 trainer educator FTEs. And if we scroll down, we see that that gives us a total of 0.25 FTEs. Right. Then on to our last example. In this example, we assume that we have an underserved grantee, and we assume they work with a 40-hour work week. Again, you could change this if that's appropriate for your organization. And for the first staff person, we go with the third example where the organization used its OVW program grant to fund a full-time counseling position, but the counselor was only hired 2 months into the reporting period. So when it comes to filling out step 4, the number of months during the 6-month reporting period that this staff member's position was paid with OVW grant funds, we have to look at 2 hours into the reporting period, means there are 4 months left. So we enter 4. Then for the category, it's a counselor, so we select a counselor category. And for the method to calculate this in step 6, we select percent of time, because this person is a full-time staff person. We enter the 100 here. And to make this a little more interesting, we're going to add on the fourth example where your OVW program grant paid a translator for 65 hours of work in this reporting period. So for staff B, this applies to the whole 6 months, and it's a translator, so we select the translator category. But here for step 6, for the method of how to calculate the FTEs, we go based off of the information we have, and we know they worked 65 hours over the entire period. So we select total hours worked in period, and then put in the 65 hours here in step 7. And that means we are done, and we can look at our little table here, and we see there's 0.67 counselor FTEs and 0.06 translator FTEs, which gives us a total of 0.73 FTEs. Okay, so I hope that gives you an idea of how the FTE works, and that you can even use it when when you have different ways of calculating different staff members on your team and your organization. The calculator is still able to accommodate that, and you can just go through it per staff member like this. Okay, and I'm going to hand it over to Hannah to run through some more information before we get to our questions. And back to the PowerPoint for that.
Thank you. Before I get into the resources, I was watching the Q&A box, and I want to call out verbally a couple of questions I was seeing. And so this FTE calculator is not a requirement. It is something that you can use if it is helpful to you, if you want to. Another thing I was seeing was that the technical assistance program is different than the rest of the discretionary programs in that the TA form does not ask you to break out the staff categories by function. The TA form asks you to simply report a total FTE, and we have a separate TA toolkit that can help you with reporting your FTEs, and that is also available on our website, and I will put that in the chat box to everyone. And lastly, this is geared to the discretionary programs, and so if you are a STOP or SAP formula subgrantee or state administrator, calculating FTEs is essentially the same, except for using a different denominator than the 6 months. You would be using the 12 months. Okay. So jumping back to the resources, and then we can get to the Q&A again. This slide has some contact information for Just Grants. So again, we here at VAWA MEI do not have access to Just Grants. If you are experiencing technical issues with accessing your account or uploading the progress reporting form into your Just Grants account, you will need to reach out to Just Grants. As a reminder, you access the reporting form by downloading the form from our website and then upload it into Just Grants. If you have not logged into your Just Grants account recently or ever, I highly recommend that you do that sooner rather than later. The next resource or contact information we have available is OVW. So your program specialist is someone you would want to reach out to if you need to verify your grant supported activities. If you need any products approved, that is also who you need to reach out to. And lastly, if you cannot submit your progress report by the deadline, definitely reach out to your program specialist so they know what's going on. And lastly, our contact information. So if you have any questions about the reporting form itself, whether that be how to report or what the information we are asking for, please reach out to us and we will help you gather, report, understand the data. And so you can ask for individual PA via our website through the Contact Us page, or you can email or call us directly. Or lastly, on this last slide is some direct contact information for myself and Eliza. Please feel free to reach out to either one of us anytime with support with reporting staff FTEs or anything else about the progress reporting form or process. We have about 15 minutes left, which I think is great. And so if anybody has any additional questions that you are hoping to have answered, please let us know. I will review the Q&A pod for any themes again. As a reminder, there are a lot of ways to calculate an FTE. As Eliza displayed in the calculator, you could calculate it based off of the percentage. You could calculate it based off of the hours worked. You could calculate it based off of the months that they worked. There are a lot of different ways to approach calculating FTEs. And so if you are in a rut and not sure how to get that number, please call us. We have some grantees that get in touch with us every 6 months to help them calculate, and we're happy to do that anytime. Okay. So there is a question of, if I wanted to watch this again, will this webinar be on your website? And the answer is yes. TA2TA will send us the recording once they get it, and then we will put together all of the materials and put it up on our website in the, I believe, tools and resources or the webinar categories. You can access materials through either one. Okay. There was also a couple questions I was seeing about overtime. And so if your grant uses funds to only pay for overtime for a staff position, you could calculate that FTE by taking the number of hours they worked during the 6-month reporting period and dividing that by the 1,040. If the situation arises where they are funded partially by the grant, plus they get overtime paid for by the grant, you could approach this in a couple different ways. An easy way to approach it might be to calculate the 60% that is funded by the grant, or whatever percentage it is, and then separately calculate the overtime. If you have the total number of hours worked, you could then take those hours and divide it by the 1,040, and then add those two FTEs together to get the number that you would then report on the reporting form. Okay. Is there, I see a couple other questions coming in. Things seem to be quieting down. Another thing I saw was for sick time or leave time that is still paid for by the grant. If grant funds are used to support staff time at all, please report that on the reporting form. So if it is 3 days of sick time that's paid for by the grant, you would still include that in your calculation. Or 3 months. If the grant is paying for it, please report it. One thing that we look at when we're reviewing the data is we look at the staff section and see what functions are reported in, and then check to see if there are correlating activities reported throughout the form. So for example, if we see a trainer FTE in the staff section, we typically expect to see some training information in the training section. If the case arises where you're using funds to pay for leave and therefore there were no activities, simply describe that in the narrative so your program specialist knows how those funds were used, as well as us at VAWA MEI. We use the narrative a lot when we're reviewing the data. It provides a lot of context, and if we see that in the narrative, it would potentially prevent us from reaching out to you with any questions. Okay. Well, it seems the questions pod has slowed. Please reach out to us if you have anything pop up later on. We are available via the many memes written on the slide. Eliza and I, as well as our colleagues Devin and Erica, will hang around for a few minutes. But if that is all that, if that's all the questions you have, you are free to go. Thank you again so much to TA to TA for hosting, as well as all of the captioners and interpreters. We really appreciate your time and energy in supporting us and the grantees.